The sky was a shattered kaleidoscope of violet and silver, the ruins of the ancient city stretched out like skeletal remains under the relentless storm of electric rain. Garen pulled his cloak tighter, the fabric fraying from years of scavenging through the void zones. His scanner buzzed incessantly, drawing him deeper into the desolation. He was close. Too close. The artifact he sought wasn't just rare, it was forbidden. Stories whispered across the outposts spoke of the thing buried beneath these ruins, a biomechanical heart, still pulsing faintly with an energy source older than recorded time. A remnant of a civilization that had reached too far into the fabric of existence and torn it apart. His boots crunched over glassy rubble as the scanner's light turned an ominous crimson. He halted, scanning the shadows. The air was charged, not just with the storm but with a tension that prickled against his skin. Something wasn't right. A shriek ripped through the silence, alien and guttural. Garen dropped to one knee, unholstering his pulse rifle in one fluid motion. From the darkness emerged a creature that was more machine than beast, its multi-limbed frame glinting with razor-edged metal. It moved with a predatory grace, its optics glowing a deadly blue. Garen didn't hesitate. He fired, the pulse blast crackling through the air and slamming into the creature's side. It screeched, convulsing as sparks and viscera erupted, but it didn't stop. It lunged, faster than he anticipated. Garen rolled, narrowly avoiding the swipe of a blade-like appendage. The second creature appeared moments later, its form more massive, its growl resonating deep enough to rattle his chest. The heart wasn't just guarded, it was hunted. With a grunt, Garen detonated a flash charge, the blinding light and concussive wave giving him just enough time to scramble through a crumbling archway. He slid behind a collapsed pillar, panting, his pulse rifle humming as it recharged. His scanner buzzed again, more insistent this time, pulling his gaze downward. Beneath his feet, under the layers of debris, the energy source spiked. The heart was directly below him. The creatures weren't far behind, their mechanical whirs and guttural clicks growing louder. Garen spotted a jagged hole in the floor, leading into the darkness below. Without thinking, he jumped, landing hard in the chamber beneath. The air here was colder, almost still, as though the storm above was a distant memory. In the center of the room, encased in an intricate glass chamber, was the heart. It was larger than he'd imagined, almost human in form but laced with veins of glowing silver and blackened circuits. It pulsed faintly, each beat reverberating through the chamber like the toll of an ancient bell. He stepped closer, but the moment he did, a wave of heat erupted behind him. The creatures had followed, dropping into the chamber with terrifying speed. Garen raised his rifle, but before he could fire, the heart reacted. Its glow intensified, a sound like 1,000 voices whispering at once filling the air. A figure emerged from the shadows, impossibly human, impossibly alive. Her eyes glowed with the same eerie light as the heart. Her movements were slow, deliberate, and yet there was something unmistakably graceful about her. She raised a hand, and with it, the creatures froze mid-attack. Garen's breath caught. You're alive. Her voice was a melody and a command, layered with harmonics that defied understanding. Not alive. Not dead. Bound. And now you've woken me. Her gaze locked onto him, sharp and piercing. Why have you come, Seeker? Before he could answer, the walls shuddered, the chamber groaning as though the ruins themselves resented her reawakening. The creatures began to twitch, breaking free of her hold. The glow of the heart grew brighter, its pulse now a rapid rhythm, syncing with hers. And then she looked at him, her expression shifting to something almost human. You don't know what you've done. The walls cracked. The creatures lunged. And the chamber exploded into chaos. The explosion ripped through the chamber, flinging Garen into a wall. His vision blurred as the concussive force left his ears ringing. The glowing woman stood unfazed, her presence commanding even as the chaos unfolded around her. The biomechanical creatures shrieked, their metallic limbs thrashing wildly, caught between their directive and the overwhelming surge of energy radiating from the heart. Garen scrambled to his feet, shaking off the disorientation. His pulse rifle was still strapped to his back, but the woman seemed to hold the attention of the creatures for now. She turned to him, her luminous eyes narrowing. We need to leave. Now. I didn't come this far to run. Garen barked, though his voice betrayed his uncertainty. You don't understand what's happening, she snapped, her voice reverberating with unnatural intensity. The heart isn't just power, it's a beacon. And you've activated it. The realization hit Garen like a freight hauler. A beacon? For what? Her answer came in the form of a deafening roar from above, a sound so primal it shook the chamber's very foundation. The creatures froze, their optics dimming for a moment before they turned, retreating into the shadows with an urgency that sent chills down Garen's spine. They're running, he muttered, confused. Why are they? The roar came again, closer this time, followed by the sound of stone and metal being torn apart. The ceiling cracked, and a massive clawed appendage punched through, wrenching apart the rubble. Light poured into the chamber as a colossal form descended, a biomechanical leviathan, its body a horrific fusion of writhing cables, pulsating flesh, and shimmering, otherworldly alloys. Garen felt the blood drain from his face. What in the void is that? The woman didn't answer. Instead, she extended her hand, and the heart pulsed in response. A blinding stream of energy connected her to the artifact, and the room was bathed in its unearthly glow. The leviathan let out a guttural snarl, its massive eyes locking onto her. This is your doing, Seeker, she hissed, the light around her intensifying. Now fight or die. The leviathan lunged, its claws tearing through the space where they stood. Garen dove to the side, rolling to his feet and firing a volley of pulse shots. The blast struck the creature's flank, searing its flesh and sparking against its metal, but it barely flinched. It swung a massive tail, catching him mid-dodge and sending him sprawling. The woman raised both hands, her glow intensifying until tendrils of energy erupted from her palms, coiling around the leviathan. The beast howled in defiance, struggling against the restraints. The chamber shook violently as the power surged, the walls crumbling under the strain. You can't hold it forever, Garen shouted, coughing as dust filled the air. He grabbed a fragmentation charge from his belt, primed it, and hurled it at the leviathan's head. The explosion sent shrapnel slicing into its hide, eliciting a furious bellow. I don't need forever, she replied through gritted teeth, her energy shifting. The tendrils morphed into spikes of pure light, driving into the leviathan's core. The beast convulsed, its roar turning into a tortured scream before it collapsed in a heap of smoldering ruin. The silence that followed was deafening. Garen pushed himself to his feet, his body aching from the ordeal. What the hell was that thing? A guardian, she replied, her glow dimming slightly. One of many. His chest tightened. Many. Before she could answer, the ground trembled again, not from the aftermath, but from something far worse. A distant rumble grew louder, the sound of countless mechanical limbs moving in unison. The air itself seemed to hum with their approach. The woman turned to him, her expression grim. We've triggered the failsafe. More are coming. Failsafe. Garen spat, his frustration boiling over. Why didn't you warn me before I? There wasn't time, she snapped. Her voice softened, almost pleading. If you want to survive, you need to trust me. Garen hesitated, his instincts screaming at him to run. But something in her eyes, a flicker of desperation, of humanity, made him nod. Lead the way. She reached out, grabbing his hand. The heart pulsed again, and the chamber dissolved into a blinding vortex of light. As they disappeared, the first wave of guardians swarmed into the ruins, their mechanical cries echoing through the storm. You said. The light swallowed them whole, and for a moment, Garen thought he was dead. Then the ground solidified beneath his boots, and the world snapped back into focus. They were no longer in the crumbling ruins. Instead, they stood in a massive, cylindrical chamber that pulsed with faint blue light. The walls were alive with shifting patterns, like veins coursing with liquid energy. Garen stumbled, clutching his head. Where are we? The Nexus, she said, her voice sharper now, though exhaustion flickered in her eyes. It's the heart's core, a sanctuary. At least, it used to be. Used to be, he echoed, but the question died on his lips as he noticed the bodies. Dozens, no, hundreds, of them. Human and not. skeletons entwined with rusted machines, their remains scattered like offerings at an altar. His stomach churned. "What is this place?" he demanded. "A tomb," she answered flatly. "For those who failed before you." The reality hit Garen like a punch to the gut. He turned to her, anger boiling over. "You knew this would happen, didn't you? You brought me here to stop the end," she interrupted, stepping closer. Her glow was faint now, her form more fragile than before. "Do you think I wanted this? That I chose to be bound to that thing for 1,000 years? I've been waiting for someone like you, someone reckless enough to unlock it and strong enough to survive." The air in the Nexus shifted, a low hum vibrating through the floor. Garen's instincts flared, and he raised his rifle. "What now?" She didn't answer. Instead, she turned to the heart, which hovered in the center of the room, suspended by threads of glowing energy. Its pulse quickened, and with each beat, the hum grew louder. "It's awakening," she said, her tone grave. "The heart isn't just power, it's a gateway. And something on the other side is trying to break through." Garen swore under his breath. "You're telling me we unleashed some ancient nightmare?" "Not just one," she said, her voice trembling. "All of them." The Nexus walls began to shimmer, and shadowy figures emerged from the light. They were humanoid, but twisted, each one a grotesque amalgamation of organic and mechanical parts. Their eyes burned with a sickly green glow, and their movements were unnaturally fluid. "Guardians," she whispered, taking a step back. "But these aren't just protectors. They're hunters." Garen aimed his rifle, firing at the nearest one. The pulse shot struck its chest, but instead of falling, the creature absorbed the energy, its form crackling as it grew more solid. "Well, that's just fantastic," he yelled. "Got any bright ideas?" "I can hold them off," she said, stepping toward the heart. Her glow intensified, and the heart responded, its pulsing light radiating outward. The Guardians paused, their movements faltering as if caught in an invisible web. "You can't hold them forever," Garen said, his voice urgent. "I don't need forever," she replied, echoing her earlier words. "But I need time. I have to seal the gateway." "And what happens to you?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Her gaze softened. "The heart and I are bound. If it goes, so do I." Garen clenched his fists, his mind racing. He hated this, the feeling of being a pawn in someone else's game. But he also knew the stakes. "No. There's got to be another way." "There isn't," she said, her voice resolute. "This is why you're here. To finish what I can't." The Guardians began to shake off her hold, their forms growing more defined. The air buzzed with their energy, and the hum of the Nexus became a deafening roar. She turned to him, her hand brushing his arm. "Go. I'll keep them here." Garen hesitated, his gut twisting. "I don't leave people behind." "Then we both die," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "Please, Garen. Let me do this." Before he could argue, the ground beneath him began to shift. A hidden platform rose, lifting him toward a glowing exit high above. He shouted her name, reaching out, but the light swallowed him again. The last thing he saw was her, standing before the heart, her glow like a supernova as the Guardians closed in. The light spat Garen out into the open air, and he hit the ground hard, skidding across damp soil. When he looked up, he was on a plateau overlooking the ruins far below. The storm still raged, lightning illuminating the desolate landscape. The Nexus was gone, swallowed by the earth like it had never existed. "No," he whispered, his breath catching in his throat. His fists clenched as he stared at the spot where she had been. She was gone. She sacrificed herself. The earth trembled violently, snapping him back to the present. From the ruins, a column of green light erupted into the sky, its intensity so blinding that it seemed to pierce the heavens. It wasn't over. Whatever she had done hadn't been enough. Garen scrambled to his feet, clutching his pulse rifle as the ground split beneath him. From the rift emerged more of the twisted Guardians, their forms shadowed but unmistakable, and they were climbing fast. Behind them, the Leviathan roared, a sound that shook his bones and stole the air from his lungs. It wasn't just one Leviathan anymore. It was many. He glanced at his scanner, the device frantically blinking red. Energy readings spiked higher than he'd ever seen. Something massive, something catastrophic, was on the verge of breaking through the rift. This wasn't supposed to happen, he growled, his voice trembling. She was supposed to stop it. The storm intensified, the wind whipping around him like a living thing. He felt helpless, the weight of the moment crushing him. Then, amidst the chaos, he heard it, a faint voice carried on the wind. Her voice. Garen, you have to finish this. He turned toward the sound, his heart pounding. How? He shouted into the storm. What do I do? The answer came not in words but in a sensation, a burning warmth in his chest. He looked down to see his body glowing faintly, the same light that had emanated from her. The heart's energy. Somehow, it had passed to him. The realization hit him like a shockwave. She hadn't just sacrificed herself, she had given him the power to end it. To seal the gateway. But it came with a price. He would have to do what she couldn't. He glanced at the horde of creatures clawing their way toward him. There was no time to hesitate. He raised his hands instinctively, and the energy surged through him, bright and blinding. The Guardians hesitated, their movements faltering as the light intensified. Garen focused on the rift, willing the energy outward. A beam of pure, radiant power shot from his hands, striking the column of green light. The ground buckled beneath him, and the creatures howled in unison, their forms disintegrating in the beam's wake. But the Leviathans didn't stop. They surged forward, their massive forms tearing through the terrain. The strain of holding the energy was unbearable, every nerve in his body screaming in protest. Still, he pushed harder, channeling everything he had. The beam widened, engulfing the rift and the Leviathans. The sky cracked open, and the storm seemed to freeze in place. The energy reached its zenith, and with a deafening explosion, the rift collapsed in on itself, taking the creatures with it. The force of the blast threw Garen backward, and he hit the ground hard, his vision fading. As the light dimmed, the storm began to dissipate, the once violent sky returning to an eerie calm. When he woke, the ruins were silent. The air was heavy with the scent of scorched earth and ozone. Garen groaned, every muscle aching, and forced himself to sit up. The scanner on his wrist was dead, its screen cracked and lifeless. He looked down at his hands. The glow was gone. The energy, the power, it had left him. The heart was gone, and with it, so was she. The weight of it all hit him, and he sat there in the silence, staring at the horizon. He had saved the world, or what was left of it, but at a cost he wasn't sure he could bear. As the sun began to rise, its rays breaking over the ruins, he stood, shouldering his rifle. There was no one to congratulate him, no one to tell him what came next. But he knew one thing for certain, her sacrifice hadn't been in vain. And neither would his journey.